Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for the prayer bow. When we were sitting and thinking about the 7 principles of spiritualism, the first 2, of course, are about our creation and our interaction in the physical world. And then I think that it's very strategic that the 3rd principle is right after. The 3rd principle, which says the communion of spirit and the ministry of angels. I'm going to speak a little bit on the communion with spirits today, the 3rd principle. And when I was sitting here, I was wondering a few things. Have you ever thought about the fact that you may return as a message? Did you ever think about what you would say? And as mediums, as spiritualists, as people that are collected together, and in a little bit we will hear a demonstration, did you ever think, now, why did that message come forward from Spirit today? That's something that I think about all the time. Every time I am demonstrating, I am always looking at why is it that this particular message from this particular spirit through this particular medium has come forward. And it really got me thinking. It got me thinking about what is the purpose of communing with Spirit. Now, many people, when we look at the history of spiritualism, especially in the last 100 years, the answer I hear over and over again is, oh, well, it proves the existence of life after death. But that's never been enough for me. There's always been this nag in my soul that says there's more to it than just whether or not there is life after death. And when we look back at the history of the world, we know that spirit communication has happened since the beginning of time. The pharaohs of Egypt believed in a life after death. They believed in their pyramids, in providing for a life that will continue. We see Joan of Arc having dreams of loved ones coming to her. We know that in ancient biblical times that people were communing with Spirit. So it isn't just enough to prove that there's life after death, because that has been part of our existence as humanity for centuries, if not millennium of years past. As I reflected on this, there were basically 3 things that I believe is important to remember why the spirit world comes to communicate with us. And in particular, why as spiritualists, this is one of our tenets. The first, it really signals to us that our loved ones are never far away. The second is that it does demonstrate that communication through the soul is possible. And third, it gives undeniable proof that God is everywhere, and source, spirit, that spark of the divine is in everyone and with everything in God's creation. So as I was thinking over this, I was beginning to think about how our loved ones are never very far. And how often has it happened during a meeting or a demonstration or a service, divine service, where the medium on the platform says, your mother knows that you were looking through your books. Your father is telling me that you just celebrated Father's Day and you put a rose on his grave. How often do we hear your son or daughter are here? And they say, "Go out into the world, do not mourn them, for there is no death." Those are proofs that our loved ones are near us. They know what is going on in our life, and they know that they are able to look into your world, because the spirit world is all around us. Now, second is a little more finessed here, and it demonstrates that communication through the soul is possible. Nuna showed us her new dog just before service, cute little girl, and how many of us have been able to communicate with our dogs, with our animals, and know what they need? How many, without ever expressing it through the words? How many times have you thought of someone and you get a phone call from them, or a text message comes in, or an email message comes in? And it isn't that the person is necessarily tuning into your feelings, but there's this collective consciousness that unites all minds together. And that's what I think is so important here, is that this connective consciousness goes between human to even our pets. It doesn't stop just at the physical death. And that's another demonstrating factor here of mediumship, is that communication from one soul through the soul of the medium to the soul of the sitter is absolutely possible. And third, I believe that the mediumship, the role of mediumship, is to prove that life is eternal. God is eternal. And I believe that when modern spiritualism began, if we look at the history of modern spiritualism, it's after times of tragedy. The Civil War in America, the First World War, the Second World War. We are looking at these at opportunities where the spirit world wants to come forward and say, "I'm still here." The spirit world wants to not only say that they're there, but they also want to remind you of your spirit. They want to remind you of your infinite and eternal soul. So when we are able to recognize that within ourselves, the spirit world draws near. The spirit world gives us messages. The spirit world allows us to have communication. And during those communications, that's where we know that we are supported. We know that our helpers are near. It could be a loved one who's a helper. We know that healing is coming through us because God is running through us. The spirit world gives us that guidance. And when we listen and we still the mind and we allow the spirit world to impress us, we often get the answers that we need. We don't always get the answers we want, but we get the answers we need. And so the ability to recognize that this force, this life force, this infinite intelligence, God, Father God, is running through us all. I believe that is why we have this communion with Spirit. And last, I'm going to just conclude today with a quote by Mary Longley. In her book, she writes, "In the teachings and illustrations as they emanate from the spirit world," Mary Longley writes, "The office of mediumship is to bless humanity, to enable the race to overcome conditions of matter sufficiently to make such the servant rather than the master of intelligent beings, to enable it to guide the individual for their own good and the good of others." Mediumship and the communication of the spirit world is not something that is unique for spiritualists or for an individual medium. But it is through these communications where we can produce the most good for the most people. And in this case, the world. And I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Alan, for a very inspiring address. And isn't it